screen. Right. And is the sound working? Can people hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Let me know if you can, because I'm not sure where the mic is that's picking me up.
It's right here.
Okay. Okay, so I'm doing Tech Lunch today, and I'm going to talk about a Rails API gem that I've used in like a little app that sends emails to the authors of blog posts on the Kashax blog when someone comments on on a blog post. And so I discovered this Rails API gem that's actually going to turn into it's going to be included in Rails 5. And it's pretty cool, so we'll go through that a little bit. Obviously, a lot of you know a lot more than me, so please interject with comments if I mess up, or if there's something interesting, or if you've had experience with like Sinatra or something like that. Like, please talk about that, because I don't have that much content to offer everybody else. Okay. Let's see. So I guess I want to start by playing around with using the Rails API. Actually, let's see. So I grabbed the most recent Rails code. So I'm going to be using the Rails 5 essentially. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Rails API app, and then we're going to play around with it briefly and see how easy it is to set up with essentially one generator command. I guess let's call it not a very good name, but it's okay. Okay, so in Rails 5, you'll be able to just use this dash API to make an API app. And what that does is it pairs down the full Rails stack, I guess. Oh, I'm running the wrong map. Okay, so I guess I should make this bigger. All right, yeah, I guess everyone can see now. Okay, so this is our Rails API app, and so there are some differences. Like, for instance, our main controller is a subclass of Action Controller API, which is slightly different than Action Controller Base or whatever it is for regular Rails apps. And with a Rails API app, we get rid of a lot of the middleware and stuff. So it's like using just Rails to run an API app is a huge waste, because there's a lot of machinery for rendering views and stuff like that, and we don't want any of that. So the idea here is that it gets rid of a lot of that. And from sort of my research, it's still slower than if you're going to use something like Grape, which I don't know anything about. If anyone does, maybe they could interject. But so it's like it's still not super lightweight, but it's really easy. And I'm assuming that there's a lot of configurations that you can customize. So let's go ahead and just generate pretty much everything here with the scaffold. So let's see, title, and then completed. Okay, so the little app that we're creating right here is a really simple to-do web app, and I'm actually using this Backbone.js app that's essentially just a to-do list where you can enter things and then mark them as complete or whatever. And right now this app is using like local storage to store these things. And so what we want to do is have this JavaScript app send a request to our API app, which is then going to return the data or store the data in a database. So let's check out the controller, the to-dos controller that was created with this scaffold. Okay, so this is what we got from our scaffold, which is basically everything we need for like a really simple API. And so I guess let's go ahead and play around with it a little bit. Let's see. Oh yeah, I guess here we can. Okay. Okay, so we should be able to add add things to our to-do list. So and it's not happy with something.
Are you sending a GET or a POST?
Oh, okay. I think that. Let's see.
It's interesting that Rails API still gives errors as HTML.
That's a good point. I never actually thought about that.
Let's see. What is it? Oh, wait. Well, it's maybe. What do we call that? Okay, I'm not sure if that was it or not. Okay, yeah, it was mad because our database didn't exist. Okay, so we should be able to add stuff now. Okay, yeah, so now we have a to-do to have fun, and we can have another one, make dinner, let's say. Okay, so our little Rails API app is working now, and so what we want to do is we want to hook up that Rails API app to this to-do app here, and to do that, we're going to get what do you call it, like cross-origin error, because it's not going to be happy that we're trying to send this across to a different domain. And so what we can do is in our Rails app, if we go to config initializers, there's this file called cores.rb, and this is set up for us so that we can add domains that we're saying, okay, it's okay if these people or if these domains try to use our API. So right now the JavaScript app is, I think it's on 9,000. So all we have to do is modify this to allow whatever domains we want, and then we won't get these like cross-domain scripting errors. So then the last thing we need to do is actually hook up the JavaScript app to use the Rails API app. And let's see, that should be. Which one is this? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this is using local storage. This is not really that important. But now we should be using the Rails API app to interface with our database. So it's mad at me. Sorry. Okay, it should be okay. I'm not sure why I'm happy. Sorry. Okay, now it should be alright. Alright, so let's go ahead and add some stuff. And so now we should be able to go back to our Rails API app and see that these things now exist in our database and were processed. So I guess let's go to the Rails console. I have all these problems with different Ruby versions right now.
You can use the .ruby version file with RVM.
Okay.
So like when you enter the directory, it'll automatically kick in.
Initialize constant. Should have the Rails. Of course, this is working fine earlier. Make sure that this is right. Okay, I'm not sure why it's mad at me.
Can you scroll up to show the stack trace again?
Yeah.
Rack cores. Is there a gem that you're missing?
Oh, right. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so it's in the gem file, but it's commented out right now. So yeah, this is the gem file that you get when you generate one of these Rails API apps. And yeah, so there's the rack core gem is what you need that allows our app to use this. Okay, so we should have it now. And okay, I don't think it'll have. Okay, those are the ones that we created with curl. So let's go back to. Okay, so now let's add some stuff in here. And hopefully we should have it. Let's see, am I running? This is upset again. Alright, I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know if this is worth
Did you restart the server after you did the bundle install?
no, I didn't.
Sometimes just do that.
I'll go ahead and restart both of these. Alright, let's give it one last shot. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Austin. Alright, so this stuff was from the database and got pulled over into the JavaScript app. And if we add something else, I don't know what we had earlier, like go swimming or something, then that should exist over here, hopefully. Yeah, so we can see that now it exists in our database. So aside from all of the technical problems there, that's just sort of a short demo to show you what creating a Rails API app is like, and it should take about 2 minutes if it's something simple, not like 10 minutes or however long that took. So that's sort of the new version that you have to get the most recent Rails code in order to do. Otherwise, you can install the Rails-API gem and create a project from, I forget, it's on my blog post, the syntax. So I ended up using this Rails API app, and all it does is send emails. And I don't know. Okay, I guess I'd like to hear from some of the more experienced people. What do you typically do when creating an API app? Like, do you use Grape or Sinatra, or what are your experiences?
I've used just like normal Rails where the Rails serves up some web pages, but it's mostly used for API. We looked at Grape like a couple years ago, and it seemed kind of cool, but didn't seem like it had all that much support.
Is Grape a Ruby framework?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a Rack framework even. One thing I'm really interested in is like with web forms, you have CSRF tokens. Do you do any equivalent like authorization with at the API layer? Because API is going to be stateless, so like how do you ensure that the right person is using the API? Is there a standard mechanism for that?
Yeah, well, you need some sort of like authorization or token. So in obviously in our little demo app, we don't have anything. So on our website, if you've written a blog post, you may be well, it's not out to master yet, but you'll be getting emails if you get comments on your blog posts. And for that, I'm using a comment ID essentially as a token to authorize that, like, hey, this is not like spam or somebody trying to use your API like incorrectly. I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at then.
I guess like just like let's see. So like if I log in via, if there's some way to authenticate myself via the API before I make post requests, like how is there a standard way so that when I make a request, you know who the current user is? Because we tend to not like I don't know on the website we use session cookies, but I don't know if that's a standard thing with sending a session cookie as a header or as a field with all of the post requests, or kind of how you end up dealing with that layer.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I have a comment I can make about that.
Okay.
And one thing that I did for Miner is I got once I do the OAuth from Twitter, then I create an API key. So when I hit my API, I pass along my key. So it's just every single request sends that key, and that's basically how I'm tracking a user session. And when I talk about a current user, what I mean is the API key that's attached to that request.
with every request.
Every request has an API key attached to it. And so then in my code, I have current user defined as being the user that has the given API that was passed in with the request.
And I just did something rather similar with Angular and Devise, basically what Cholo is doing. But I feel like it's really hacky and terrible, and they took token off out of Devise. You have to like hack it back in and then do all this workaround. And I feel like we're in this situation where there's no real good solution for authentication through an API. And then there's also the CRSF token, which I've just done with headers, and also I feel is kind of weird.
I'm really hoping that with Rails 5 kind of including all the API, like the Rails API stuff, by default, that we will see some sort of more standardized token auth, because I agree that it's pretty much a roll your own thing now. And I understand the Devise team's decision to take it out, because it's true that there's no like one-size-fits-all real solution for token auth, but at the same time, I think by removing it, they're just encouraging people to kind of try and roll their own, and a lot of the ones that people have come up with really aren't that good. And I say that knowing that the ones I've come up with in the past haven't been as good. So I'm equally guilty here. But yeah, doing token auth, the most common way is if you're offering something from just server to server, it's really easy. And that is, you can just set like some headers in every request as long as it's going over SSL, and it really should be. So as long as you're on a secured connection, you can send like a header like X username and X password. And then you just authenticate them on every request because they have the same token every time. And that's like if you use SendGrid or some of the other mail things, that's what you're doing. Every time you talk to their API, you're sending your credentials along in an HTTP header, and it's all easy because you're just talking from server to server, and those credentials don't change. It's harder when you're trying to like let a mobile app or something talk to you, because on those you do want the session to end. And so then you have to come up with a way of like you issue the token, and then they hand you the token on every HTTP request, but you have to let them log out and expire it. Or you have to expire it after a certain amount of inactivity, and then you have to make sure the app knows that after a certain amount of time has passed, that if it gets an error about auth, then it needs to load it up again. So I think token-based auth is a problem, and I really hope that there's some sort of nicer standardized solution for Rails 5 by the time it actually comes out. As far as Grape goes, I have used Grape on an application where it was being mounted as an engine, and it worked fine. I don't know if I'd really reach for it myself, because I never felt like doing things with standard Rails controllers was problematic, but it is possible to just mount Grape inside of a Rails app. Rails actually ships with a JSON library called JBuilder, which is completely unrelated to the Java IDE called JBuilder. But JBuilder is just it's a sort of like the XML builder library, except for making JSON, and using that to render JSON views works great. So that's what I've done in the past when I need is I've just got my regular controllers, and when they're rendering JSON, they use that. You can override to JSON, or is it as JSON? I always mix that up and have to make sure I'm looking at the right one, but I kind of prefer using the builders because it's easier to make sure you're explicitly including or excluding something rather than doing the as JSON method, where you're kind of abstracting it out into an overridden method rather than a template.
Speaking about common things that we solve with APIs, are there any kind of best practices for versioning the API? Do they recommend anything like in the Rails API docs?
I haven't read anything about that, but I feel like there's probably something. I mean, their documentation is not like super thorough, so I feel like it will probably get better if it sort of gets picked up. But yeah, so I'm not really.
What's the major use case for having versioning on an API? Like, what problem does it solve beyond just being organized?
It's like if you've deployed an app, and then a year later you want to deploy a new app, and you have some breaking changes in the back end.
Okay.
So
So
you
what's
still
the
need to
return
support
time?
version 1, and you're supporting version 2 with some different routes. But there's enough shared functionality that it's not different apps. I've seen that with like route namespacing, but I've also seen it with headers. I remember there's a big debate a while ago, like, should you be sending a custom header that says the version, or should it be part of RESTful routes?
I am firmly on the routes part of this argument because I think having to examine the HTTP headers to see why something isn't working right is a big extra step that's kind of annoying, whereas if it's directly in the route, then it's much more obvious what version they're on.
That makes
What
sense.
is the argument for the other way, for the headers?
I think the argument is that RESTfulness is about specific resources, and so you have the same resource that you're viewing as different versions. So the argument is that that shouldn't really be part of the route. Like v1 user Ben is the same as v2 user Ben, so it should be something like maybe a query param or something that like a header. The headers do let you another benefit is that you can do load balancing based on headers, so you can push all v1 traffic to one place and all v2 traffic to another place. You can do load balancing based on the route as well, but there's something nice and uniform about load balancing based on headers. Or I guess you could do it based on subdomain, would be an even better one, maybe.
We just spent about an hour here talking through authority issue caused by lack of API versioning. It's like the client's kind of up a creek, and getting out of it's going to be a real big pain. So these things are good to set up initially, I think.
What issue did you run into due to versioning?
In some circumstances, they so the main thing is the API is just they're just like serializing like the user object, right? There's like user.toJSON and blah, and sometimes the API is also handling in addition to responding to API calls. There's a whole kind of GUI front end to manage it, and sometimes they need to modify the database schema to implement some feature that has nothing to do with the API. But because they're just dumping the table out, whoever is consuming the API is getting extra fields added. And the API is being consumed by a PhoneGap app with a SQLite database that basically blows up when that happens. So, yeah, so there's some really interesting ways we can like try to deduce database structure in metaprogram JavaScript, but we think API versioning might be better. Actually, Adrian helped that.
I'm kind of interested in the idea of that we got these like error messages as HTML, which to me means that the app is still loading the full stack, just maybe not on every request. Or I guess I'm curious what the stack looks like. Is it possible to like set a breakpoint inside a controller and see how thick the rack stack is?
How would you do that?
You could add pry to the gem file, and then just put a binding.pry inside that controller. Are you still screen sharing?
I know. Sorry. Great. What do I do with the?
Can you screen share?
Oh yeah.
And then
Okay.
So inside your controller, like let's say just in the index before you render JSON,
Mhm.
just put a binding.pry. And then in your gem file, you have to add the pry gem.
Yeah.
And then make a request. Which you can even do on the front end, like in that to-dos app. Or curl. If you hit Control C in that terminal, if it's the same one you used earlier, you can hit Control R and start typing curl, and it like will search for the last time you typed curl. If that's what you're looking for. Oh, but you just killed the server, right?
I'll go back to the window.
And let's see, you're in, it jumped into the debugger in the other window.
Mhm.
So
Sorry about that.
can you type the command, it's pry-backtrace? Dash backtrace. And I think it'll tab complete. So this kind of shows us what the stack is. How deep does that go? If you hit Q, what is can you do like pry-backtrace.count? That didn't work. Or dot size or something. Yeah, it's not a method. I'm just curious how thick the stack is. Yeah, I don't know. Anyone know some good Rails metaprogramming to figure out like what rail ties are loaded? Or does this stack look thin? I mean, it doesn't look bad to me. Yeah. Anyway, cool.
Yeah, so I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add.
I have a question. So did you not have to use JSON P? That's the point of using the cores?
Yeah, so,
That's cool.
yeah.
And is that on every, can I put that into just the API, or can I use it on a regular Rails project?
Sounds like it's a rack middleware plugin, so you can use it on any rack capable server.
I don't know if there's any extra stuff. I mean, yeah, since it's still Rails.
If you want to just see the rack middleware, you can just do rake middleware, and it'll give you an ordered list of all the middlewares.
Oh, nice. What does it typically look like on a Rails app?
Yeah, good question. Right? Let me do it real quick.
So, that's it.
Nice.
And you can, I mean, there are more options as far as what you include. So you could pare this down a little bit further if you wanted to.
So there's a couple of things missing, like Action Dispatch, Flash.
Sorry.
Oddly, Action Dispatch debug exceptions is missing from. I don't know. But it looks like it's like 90% the same.
Yeah, it's funny that you'd have debug exceptions, right? Because I think that's the one that pops open.
Oh no, there it is. It's just a different order. Oh, you think that's what gives you the magic console?
I thought so. Or I'm guessing actually, but there's also this web console. So it's this idea of like, even though it's an API, you can hit it in your browser, and it'll serve up HTML. Which, I mean, is nice. I mean, we have it there. Might as well. It's a good way to debug.
Yeah, the rack stack looks pretty much the same. But it would need pretty much everything, right? The only thing, the only thing it would need is a view layer, but really rendering JSON is a view action anyway.
What if you do, is there a bundle list, or is it just gem list? Like, how do we show all the gems from the bundle?
The lock.
Yeah, you can just look at the lock file too. That'll work. Let's do bundle list might be a little easier to read. Can you run bundle list pipe wc-l to count the lines? It's 47. And I have a Rails app that has like 138, but I know a lot of that depends on like what the gems are. But I'm guessing that you don't need like coffee rails and Haml rails in general. Well, can you scroll up a little bit? I'm curious if it does install any of those. Yeah, so that's kind of nice. That's it's pretty simple. It is installing ActionView. Is ActionView responsible for rendering JSON?
I would assume ActionView is responsible for handling everything.
Cool.
But I actually don't think I could be completely removed.
It's always fun. It's always fun looking through these lists and being like, I don't know what that one does. Let me go look that up and learn something. Like I'd never heard of Loofah before. And honestly, it doesn't really seem like Loofah's needed, but it's probably a dependency of like, I don't know, something. It's a dependency of the HTML sanitizer, which I guess is needed in the PubSub controllers. Anyway, I don't know. I'm good with questions. Anyone have any other questions? Thoughts? Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Take care, guys.
All right. See you back on it.